right, good morning, Team Calendly. Good morning, Team Calendly. Welcome to our first live Candid Conversations. We've done 3 virtual. This is our first time doing it in person. We're going to talk about a lot of important things, why inclusion requires effort, unconscious and conscious bias, dig into some things around data, and of course talk about allyship and advocacy. But before we do that, I want to pass the mic, if you will, to my partner in legal activities, Ash, to set the stage.
Thank you. Had a little deja vu with your arias. You look great. For those of you that missed it, Alicia was out there on karaoke. So I thought about my intro. Of course, I had something scripted. And then yesterday, we had the pleasure of hosting Maggie. And she said something that I thought was the perfect launch pad for this conversation. She said, vulnerability creates connection. And I thought a lot about that and what that meant and what prevents us from being vulnerable, or even me as an individual. And what I determined was essentially it's fear, especially in this conversation that's meant to be uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable topic. We've talked about it a lot. But there's this fear of being labeled, misunderstood, being judged. And I think that that prevents growth. And I know that all of us are not the optimum perfect human. We're all on a growth journey. And inclusion takes all of us to be a part of it. And so today I want you to think about that sentiment and also just be open to thinking about different points of view, some of which might challenge viewpoints that you have or ideas that you have. And that's okay. That's the point. We have to have these conversations and we have to be okay with disagreeing with some of these things, but knowing that we have a new perspective that helps expand our mind and thinking about this space. So to help accommodate us throughout this discussion today, oh, thanks, Sam. This is fun because I talk with my hands. I'm going to reference these definitions just to quickly make sure that we're all aligned on how we're defining some of these terms that you'll hear today. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to you to introduce our lovely guests.
Yeah, thank you, Ash, and thank you for being a fantastic advocate and ally in this space.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, so we're going to introduce our lovely guests. Beside me, we have Drew, who was a cultural analyst, inclusion champion, and marketing executive. So before joining LinkedIn, he most recently led the diversity and inclusion strategy for global sales, marketing, and public affairs at Facebook, and U.S. consumer marketing and global comms at Nielsen. Drew delivers African-American focused political, cultural, and economic commentary as an on-air contributor on SiriusXM, and is a 2022 Nike brand ambassador for DE&I activism as a part of its Be True LGBTQ Inspired campaign. So let's give it up for Drew. And here on the end, we have the lovely Carissa Begonia, former head of DE&I at Zappos. Now she is a business and leadership coach and founder of CONSCIOUSXCHANGE, an equity-focused coaching and consulting company with a mission to advance social, political, and economic equity of racialized communities by helping BIPOC entrepreneurs build and scale their own businesses, and BIPOC professionals claim their seat at the table within their organizations. Woo! Welcome, Carissa. So before we get started and jump into the questions, I know Carissa wanted to share something with our team in light of a recent tragedy, so I'll give it to you.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. On Sunday, a lot of folks in the Asian API community celebrated Lunar New Year. And also this week, we experienced not just one, but 2 mass shootings. And so I'd like just to take a minute to have a moment of silence to honor the 18 people that were lost this past week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really quickly, one of the biggest tools of oppression used for Asians is a tool of erasure. And so acknowledging this today, taking that time was really important and significant, so thank you. I'd say just check in on your Asian colleagues, friends. You do not know who might be struggling. Sorry, I'm fighting some tears back right myself. Check in, right? And yes, just thank you. Be gentle with yourselves for those of you who are experiencing any kind of emotions with these tragedies the last couple of days. Thank you.
Cool. So we will dive in on that note. I think this is a good segue into why inclusion matters and why it requires effort. So I want to put this question to both of you. We've defined diversity and equity, which are both important terms, right? But we're focusing specifically on inclusion today. So let's just start by talking about why is inclusion so important in the workplace?
Sure. So people are really starting to focus and care about their own personal values, right? They're looking at organizations that align with those values. And so the more we care about DEI, the more we care about social justice and social political issues, right? We're looking at our organizations to say, hey, can I be there? And so employees, folks also have choices, right? With the gig economy, creator economy, there are more options that we have these days to not work at bigger organizations and start our own things, start our own side hustles, right? So there's agency, there's choice. Employee activism is rising, right? And if we're not aligned with some of these values that are really important to us, right, we're going to go somewhere else or we're going to start our own thing. So I think it's important that we start to adapt to what our employees, what we want, what we're looking for in our cultures, and again, values aligned, because if not, we might fall behind.
So I agree with every bit of that. I also come at it from the standpoint of you got to look at the numbers around work. And 92% of the population growth that has happened in this country in the last 15 years has come from communities of color. Black and Hispanic folks make up 31% of the workforce. If you don't start to really think about inclusion, then you're gonna miss the boat as it relates to the fact that, to your point, employees have more voice and more choice than they've ever had before. There's a lot of places where they can work, a lot of different ways that they can work. And so if you're not thinking about inclusion, you're building exclusion into the machine. And if you don't have a workforce that helps you decode culture, because if you look at the workforce, your customer base and their consumer bases need to be reflected, right? So I always tell companies that if you look at the numbers of population shift, and if you look at all those things, if you don't have an inclusion strategy or a multicultural strategy for marketing related things and sales related strategies, you don't have a growth strategy, because that is just the reality of the world that we live in right now. And when I say inclusion, it's not one of those things that happens sort of through serendipity or osmosis. Inclusion requires not just effort, it requires extra effort. It requires extra effort to talk to the team to say, I would like to take a moment of silence for a particular community that probably only a fraction of the people in this room belong to. And that's effort. Extra effort is to wait the entire minute. When everybody's like, oh, are we waiting the whole minute? Yes. That's extra effort. That's just a small idea of what extra effort is. And extra effort is the difference between performative and actually it being a part of culture, because employees and customers know the difference.
So Drew, I'm glad you brought up extra effort. I want you to talk a little bit more about that, especially when digging into our hiring practices and how we attract talent. What does extra effort look like?
Sure. So when I think about extra effort in hiring practices, I think that we talk about the fact that of the workforce, right? And lots of people got in trouble in the last few years for saying things like, oh, we just don't know where those shining Black people are that could come and work for us, right? And my response to that is that there are 2 million African Americans with advanced degrees in this country, and maybe ask a Black person, right? Or maybe put in some effort, right? Or increase your own personal network so that you have a better understanding of, where all of these folks are, right? And so the part of that, if you think about the recruiting structure, is you can't think of it as I'm going to put in the extra effort to find someone who's qualified for a diverse panel of applicants. You got to put in the extra effort to look for that. That means that it might not be a deficiency in the work pool. It may be a deficiency in how you have thought about this work. And being honest with yourself about that and saying, my job is to find qualified talent. My job is also to make sure that that talent pool is diverse. Both of those things are your job, right? And you have to take them both seriously. And that means a reimagining of the recruiting process for not only recruiters, but for hiring managers as well, right? To value that, because your workforce will need to be reflective. A diverse employee base, in many instances, is the canary in the coal mine that helps companies keep from making mistakes. It is you find innovation at the epicenter of people who think about things differently. It's just the way it works.
It's kind of a good segue as well, because before recruiting, I'm talent attraction, employer branding. So Carissa, I wanted to talk with you. You know, my team, we do try to be really intentional, but there's always room for improvement with the employer brand space. So I just wanted to understand from you, how can Calendly, or even just organizations in general, be more inclusive as they approach the external marketplace?
You know, I like to take this from a perspective of what are we doing internally to reflect what we're trying to do externally, right? So it's not just the token person on, you know, a marketing asset that we can see on the website, because again, employees are smart, right? We see that now. We see that from a mile away too when you're recruiting us, right? So I think really you can get these different ideas of how to actually be inclusive in all your external comms and all your kind of the ways you move, representing your company by actually embodying that within your company, right? And so some of those, and really creating that diversity to get those questions answered. Like, how can we be more diverse? Don't ask me, right? Like, ask the folks that are in your, like, sitting at these tables. They'll tell you where to go recruit, right? They'll tell you what is missing, right? Are we opening ourselves up to listening? Now that's a big thing, right? Because we don't like to listen. We like to dictate that this is, and assume that this is the way it's been, and this is how it should be, and this is what I've learned from, you know, some Cornell certification that I went through, and that's what they told me is the standard, right? And I think what we're kind of expressing here today is to imagine and think differently, right? And that one kind of topic we all talked about, like in preparing here, was like diversity of thought. What do you think diversity of thought comes from? A homogenous group of people, right? And so you have the access within this group. I met some wonderful people. This company looks wildly diverse compared to some of the places I've worked at, right? The answers are here, right? And so embodying that and when you walk through this world, right, those are the answers. It's from your people.
Yeah, listening to people from underrepresented groups is really important, because once we get to the level of trust at work, we'll be really honest about what it is that we want and what we need and where mistakes are being made, and we'll work as hard as anybody else to help the company course correct. But one of the reasons why inclusion is so important is because we are all smarter and more candid with each other when there's a trust factor there. And so inclusion helps beget trust. And that's the part where if you're in the trenches with someone and you're getting ready to listen, I've been at a pre-IPO company. If you're getting in the trenches with people where it's like, yo, we are about to go to war to make something happen. We're about to be in this together. That means that you've got to trust this person and trust their actions and trust their candor with you in a way that is totally different than how you may have operated before and previously, right? And so that's a really different space to be in. And that's something that's, I think that we don't talk enough about at work. Let's use the language. Let's say Black, let's say gay or queer, let's say Asian, right? Let's say like all of those words that make people kind of cringe a little bit, like, oh, should I say female or lady or woman, right? Like, let's go ahead and give people the language and lexicon to start talking about these things, and so that you get to a place of trust. We don't talk about the trust factor enough, because you don't get to innovation if you don't trust the person that's sitting next to you, because you can't say, that's a bad idea, don't do that. Or, you can say that, but like women are not gonna like that, right? You know, some of those things are really important.
No, I think it's huge. And again, I think it goes back to the element of fear, right? The fear is preventing the trust building and where we need to get to. So I think that was a great point. I appreciate both of that from you. So, Carissa, I want to talk about unconscious bias, right? So it's important to understand, like we've said, it does take effort and a lot of effort, to your point, and it also takes all of us. No one can opt out. We're all human at the fundamental level, right? And it takes all of us to make change, especially in this space. So what happens when inevitably our unconscious and frankly sometimes our conscious biases get in the way? How does that show up within hiring practices, within promotional practices, learning and development, all the facets of processes and structures that many organizations have?
Yeah. So, kind of going off of this, we're afraid to say the thing, right? We're afraid to have the conversations, and without conversation, we're going nowhere, really. And one term I guess I want to bring up here is white supremacy culture, right? In diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are afraid of saying Black. We're afraid of saying white. We're afraid of saying the thing. And again, this is part of the dialogue that has to happen if we're going to make any changes. So I think part of that fear, right, is we don't make progress without having these conversations. And I think some of the bias that happens is that we're afraid to say the thing, right? When we're called out, we get defensive. And so learning how to be able to sit in that discomfort, right? And we're not running towards discomfort. So of course it's hard. But so many things are being prevented because we're not speaking up, right? And that's a muscle to build for sure. It's not something, again, that I think a lot of us, again, these are uncomfortable conversations, right? But I do think that is the big muscle that we all have to try to build. And it's done one at a time. It's not, I think sometimes we think we have to do this work. It's this massive undertaking, like the entire recruitment process has to be changed. Right. Yes, and it starts with one conversation with someone, right? Like I think the activity even we did earlier when you had to meet somebody that you do not know, and so getting some of those biases can be challenged when we start to meet each other, right? And folks and learn different things from each other, and sit there and listen.
You also have to give yourself grace, but also hold yourself accountable, right? So let me give you an example of how I am Black, I am gay, I'm really gay. And I say that only because the next part really, that matters to the next part, is I am Black, I am gay, and I got pronouns wrong the first time. I was senior vice president of a large organization, and I was going to go speak at a function, and on the name tags you had to put down what your pronouns were. And I'm not proud of this, but I say this for the audience that you will not always get it right. I literally put on my name badge HRH, His Royal Highness, as my pronouns, right? Kind of funny, but not, right? My assistant happened to be with me, and I had it on my name badge. I thought it was the funniest thing ever. And she walked up to me, she said, take that off now, take that off. She pulled it off me, and I was like, girl, what's going on? And so I had a conversation off to the side. She was like, Drew, you're a leader. You're an executive. You cannot play around with these things. This is important. Your gender identity may not be a big deal for you, but for somebody else it is. And if you're gonna be a leader, you have a responsibility to think about this differently, to actually care. She was like, you getting this wrong doesn't make you a bad person, but you getting it wrong and not actually course correcting makes you a bad leader, and you're better than that. And I had to take that in. I had to accept that, I had to take that in, and I had to say, you are right. I'm not gonna justify it. I'm not gonna try and say I was just being funny. I'm not gonna tell you all the things that I've done for the queer community before that. I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna take it in, you're right, and I'm gonna do better. That's leadership. You can get this wrong and not be a bad person, but you get it wrong and you don't activate around it after you do, it makes you a bad leader. And I did not want to be a bad leader.
I love it. Yeah.
Let that one sit.
That was great. I'm glad you brought that point out. And so I want to shift into, Ashley asked a question about unconscious bias, but I also want to talk about conscious bias, Drew. And first, why is it so uncomfortable to speak about that? And then what does that look like?
Listen, we have been talking about unconscious bias and doing training for unconscious bias for like 20 years. And I'm like, okay, so now we got that. Let's do some training for the conscious bias, right? Like there are times where we have bias that is absolutely conscious. Most of the bias that I've experienced in my career has been racism. It has been homophobia, right? And so we also in corporate spaces like to use like really dressed up terms for things like bias as opposed to misogyny, racism, homophobia, right? And so we dance around it corporately because it is so uncomfortable. And when I think about, when we talk about conscious bias, I think the thing that is that when you see it, we have to call it out. We have to like say, this is not our culture. This is not what we're going to stand for. And just like there are all of these other things that we have goals around and we have non-negotiables around, those conscious biases, those isms, they have to be non-negotiables. No matter how great a performer that person is at this, they can still be fired for treating each other poorly. It has to be a part of the culture. Exiting bad actors has to be a part of the culture, or you're not really moving the needle. You're just moving bad actors around. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of organizations.
So we talked about in our prep, assuming positive intent. Can you touch on that? And then I'll shift to Carissa on that term.
So I've been a DEI leader and have responsibility for it. And in corporate spaces, we love to talk about assume good intent. And we talk about it a lot at my organization that I work for currently. And here's why assume good intent is challenging for me, right? What you have to understand is that people of color or people from underrepresented groups, we come to work, but we live in the real world, right? And so let me tell you about me as an African-American male. As a Black man, 1 in 1,000 Black men will be killed by law enforcement in this country. 1 in 1,000 Black men will be killed by law enforcement. That is before a trial has been had. That is before they've been proven guilty of anything. 1 in 1,000. So I can't go through my life just assuming good intent whenever things happen. I don't assume good intent when I'm in a store. I keep the receipt. I make a lot of money. And I am afraid that someone will think that I stole something when I walk out of a store with it. I have the receipt in my hand. I've been doing that since I was 10 years old, right? I can't assume good intent all the time in my life. If a police officer stops me, I can't assume good intent. I could die. DIE, right? So I'm 10 and 2, and I'm answering the questions. So it's a lot to ask me to just assume good intent just because I walked into the office. So I would say is that giving people grace in that, and also when you ask people to assume good intent, you also are very keen to just don't leave it at that, but to also be accountable for impact. Spend as much language about being accountable for impact as you do about assume good intent. Because I can say, listen, we may get it wrong. I just told you I got pronouns wrong, right? But that impact, I also have to be accountable for the impact if I get it wrong to someone who their whole life could depend upon somebody honoring the fact that they have a gender journey as opposed to me who does not have that same journey.
I would say the same thing about assuming positive intent. I think some folks can use that and can frankly weaponize it and get really defensive and say, but I didn't mean it. How often have you heard that? Like, oh, it was just a joke. I didn't really mean it, right? How often have we said that, right? And like you were saying, there is an impact that is made. Whether something, again, that you intended to do or not, there is someone sitting at the other end of that table or in the conversation feeling a way. And the biggest responsibility you have is to shut up and listen or ask questions, not state what your intent was. That's kind of moot at that point, right? Because there is struggle, suffering on the other end. And it's the most important thing is acknowledging that. How much, if we felt acknowledged when we mustered up the courage to call somebody out, because that's not easy, right? that takes ruminating in our heads of, okay, like, how am I going to say this? What am I going to say? Is there retaliation? So many things are happening, and it can be easily dismissed by, but I didn't mean it, right? Of course, sure, right? And again, there's still something that I'm feeling. And that feeling, when those things aren't resolved, let's be honest that can also start to fester, right? That can break that trust that you maybe are looking to build. And so this assuming positive intent just bothers me as well. For that is, again, it's another, again, defense mechanism, excuse. And often, when it's someone, a victim, right, having to muster up the courage to even call it out. Because I wish we could just say it's so easy to be like, actually, especially in the moment when we're frozen and stuck, like, did they just say that, right? And that's even a muscle for some of us to build, to like speak up, And so, same thing with saying diversity of thought, as that's gone. Assuming positive intent, okay, right? And responsibility. I think that is the big kind of theme too, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, is what are we each responsible for? And one of those things is actually acknowledging.
Because it's a culture thing, right? You want to build a culture where people feel good about their colleagues' intentions towards them, but you don't get to that trust and feeling good about the positive intent without actually there being apology and accountability when people get it wrong, and not like the defensive piece of it. Because I really don't want to have to tell you, okay, here's why you can't say that word, right? Or here's why complimenting somebody Black for being articulate is kind of touchy, right? I don't want to have to tell you that, right? But I'm going to, because I want you to be better, right? And I want to maybe not make that same mistake with the next person, so that they don't make any assumptions about you either, right?
Well, so Drew, I want to go back to you, and I wanted to ask you this question. So how do both unconscious and conscious bias affect career growth, specifically for our UPG community members?
Oh man, listen, I think so many of us have been, people from underrepresented groups have been told, like, you got to work twice as hard, but you got to keep your head down, right? You got to like find a company and like just stay in the spot, and somebody will discover you, right? And so when you are, it's very hard to raise your hand to say, hey, I've got a great idea, if you feel like that all of the other Black people in the whole company are going to be judged if you think you have a great idea and it's not that good, right? Like there's trepidation around it, right? And so if you're thinking there may be bias in the room, and you're like, oh well, I'm a woman, I'm gonna go out and do this stretch assignment, and if you feel like, well, if I get this wrong, they're never gonna give another mom the shot to do this, right? Like, so those types of things and considerations are oftentimes top of mind for people from underrepresented groups that just do not impact people who are not from those groups, right? And so you have all of these other considerations that you're thinking about sometimes that will oftentimes make you self-select out of greatness because of the fear of the environment. That's why culture is so important. That's why it's so important to state what your culture is, to state what your values are, to state what your non-negotiables are, so that you give all of the people in the room a better understanding of, okay, I can trust the organization that if I step out, that even if I don't get it right, it's a reflection on me and not everybody who looks like me. Because we carry that weight oftentimes in incredible ways. The other piece is that if you don't have a clear runway for people to feel like, hey, these things that are happening are based on true merit, people will also self-select out of the organization. They'll say, oh, I see where there are Asian women in leadership, or I see where there's like a queer person in leadership over there, or I see that there's like, people that went from intern to director over at that other place. People will self-select because there is so much more choice in the marketplace. I mean, I look at the company I work for, every 8 seconds somebody gets a job on LinkedIn. Those people aren't all just net new. They're changing companies.
Yeah. Something you kind of touched on that too is, we talk about representation and we talk about a lot of recruiting practices within DEI, right? And one of the hardest things, it's not just getting people in the door. That might be a challenge, right? But getting folks to stay is something that we're not talking about, not focusing as much on. And I'll tell you, as I was climbing the ladder, right? And, there are a few of people who look like me at every step. Being a leader, first, the only the other, how many of you in the room were that person at some company or in some organization, some meeting, right? So it's really hard actually with that additional pressure of I am representing every single person who looks like me. That's something that sometimes that burden of that leadership burden that we take on. And sometimes we don't make it. Sometimes we mess up. Right. And all the spotlight is on you, and so just those considerations too of it's a big accomplishment, when someone of a marginalized group, right, actually makes it to the table. Right. And still then how do I stay,
And how do you create a space where you're not the only person there, right? Like, I do not want to have to represent all Black folks, right? I do not want to have to represent all gay people. I think that there should be like a bunch of shiny Black people at the office, right? There should be a bunch of, well-positioned gay people at the office. But I do think that part of it is in that recruiting and retention process is that you have to really commit to inclusion, right? You have to commit to inclusion because it honestly, I've worked in technology the last 20 years, is that what I know for sure is that if you don't have inclusion at inception in building technology or building systems, you are building in exclusion in some way, shape, or form. And that's from a product standpoint. That's also from like a solutions leader standpoint. So I think that's really, really important.
Carissa, I want to shift back to you as we're talking about how conscious and unconscious bias affects UPGs. I know we talked about in the entrepreneurial space too, and we talked about an example. So how do those biases affect growth outside of the corporate space as well?
Yeah, just one example, there was an article about Amazon spending providing a lot of funding for folks of marginal communities, right? It was an exciting article, right? We're doing a good job. We're supporting Black, Indigenous, LGBTQIA plus folks, women, Latinx, founders. What was missing there? Asians. And there's assumptions, especially in the tech sector, that Asians are doing just fine, right? And when, speaking of having your seat at the table, when I read that article, again, it was supposed to be, look, pat us on the back, we're doing such a great job, we're providing all this funding for marginalized founders. And I was furious reading that. And so many things went through my mind. I'm like, is this a comms problem? Did someone forget the Asian in this sentence? Is this intentional? And either way, was someone Asian at the seat of the table making this decision? And if they were they able to speak up? If they didn't, why not? Right? So many questions came up for me when reading this one line in this article that, again, was supposed to be like, look at us doing a great job. And it was also the only company that's doing this, right? And so you might hear a lot, for example, in terms of data, right? And actually having numbers of, particularly for the Asian community, looking at disaggregating that data because people are being missed, right? And yes, just because we can see a handful of Asian CEOs or in the C-suite does not mean that representation is abounds, right? There are statistics that show that Asians, sure, we might be plentiful at the individual contributor level, but we're not in leadership positions for several reasons, right? From maybe the reasons of cultural dynamics. We're told we're quiet, we don't speak up enough. Yeah, we're really, really good at math and can do, but we're not leadership material, and so challenges there is redefine what leadership material is. And also, again, what most organizations are not doing is looking at that data at a deeper level, because you are missing a whole body of folks that deserve that extra funding or deserve that promotion. And even looking again at your statistics, your numbers, what does the leadership team look like? Do they look like this group?
No, this is a great segue. So that's one thing that we're focusing on here at Calendly, just how we look at our data. And so, in your opinion, how should we measure our efforts, and why do the numbers matter, in D&I?
So we just did a whole financial conversation earlier before we started this, right? And so it's easy to say, hey, these are the goals we have. These are targets, quarterly targets, annual targets, year-over-year growth, right? Yet when we look at numbers for people, I think that scary word of quotas within the organization, right? Of, hey, how many people of color are sitting at, have leadership roles, right? How many individual contributors are? What is the upward mobility of folks, right? Where are people dropping off? Are we really analyzing all of that at deeper levels? And then what do we do when we have that data, right? So it's one thing some companies don't even have information. So step one, right? Let's put in the systems and processes to make sure that we're doing that. If we have it, what are we speaking about? What are we talking about? We can't hit a goal if there is no target to hit, right? And that's so many times what we're doing, being in EDI for a few years here, and realizing, we have no budgets, we're a team of one or two, and a plethora of volunteers, right? But what is the budget we have? What is the resourcing that we can put against our DEI numbers? And again, coming down to, if we're talking about recruitment and representation, right? And I will say representation alone isn't the end all be all, right? We could have the same group think that's going on in a room, in a table, with a very diverse group of folks, right? But it's still important because we still can't get anywhere. We still have a chance if we're not trying. And again, we're too blindly just kind of saying, hey, here's some budget, go do some cute activities like cultural celebrations, and let's hope some of our equity numbers have changed. Let's hope, we're able to recruit more folks, So I think there's some cute stuff that's going on, and that's nice, but we're beyond that. I think we're wiser the last 2 years in particular, 3 years now, right? In particular, is there's a challenge to actually do more. We're saying it's not enough to be listening and learning. It's not enough to, it's not enough to kind of be passive about it. We have to take that extra effort. And that might mean a lot of different things, but everyone in the room has a responsibility from what that extra effort is. I cannot tell you what your extra effort is. And I think that's my challenge to you all too, is what is it for yourself? That is extra, that is the next step forward. But let's be real, hard numbers, right? Versus the soft approach to maybe, hopefully one day we'll get to, some balance of diversity within our, our EPGs here. That's silly, right?
You need operational rigor. You need to get rigorous about it. And that means you have to measure it. And that means you have to have very specific language that you use when talking about it, and language that you don't tolerate when people are talking about it. That means that you've got to correct people immediately if they start talking about diversity and inclusion as quotas. That's not what this is. We are a better company than that. That's not what we're looking at. We have goals. We have goals to be more reflective of the world that we serve. And that's what this looks like. And the rigor of looking at the numbers, the way, and reporting out the numbers and sharing where we are and sharing what our new goal is in the same way that we look at goals for any other part of our operation is important. And when you have people who are not necessarily true believers, they should understand the culture and read the room well enough to know that it's still their job even if you don't believe in it, right? Because there's so many things that we do in our jobs every day that we're like, I don't know, okay, I guess. But I want my check on the 1st and the 15th, and I want to be a good contributor to the culture. Let's go get them. Let's go get it done, right? And that means that you have to start, what I say is that you have to renew your mind in recruitment and hiring managers that this is important, that you do get some benefit from it, even if that benefit is that you get to stand up in the next company meeting and say how diverse your team is, and people are applauding because it is important to the culture, right? There's a ton of stuff that we all don't want to do necessarily all the time at work, but they're important to pushing the culture forward. And so we do it because we care about our coworkers and we care about what's important to the company and moving the company forward. You cannot change what you don't measure. And so putting the numbers out there inside, people will start to say, oh, I met somebody the other day that would be great for our organization. She's a Black woman. I met her at this event or whatever the case is. You don't say, oh, I met a Black person on the street today. I wonder if we could hire them. You say, no, I met somebody who was great for the organization who happens to be, right? And you put that, and you just push that person forward. This company or any company is not going to just hire random people to come in and offer them. You just talked about how much, you're not going to just hire random people. So we also have to disavow ourselves of the idea that whenever we see someone who is from an underrepresented group, that we automatically ask, I wonder how they got hired, right? Mm-hmm. Or I wonder if that was a diversity hire, right? We almost invariably assume when we see, cisgender heterosexual white males over 40 in any role that they're qualified for what they do, right? I met somebody just a couple of seconds ago, and I was like, what do you do? He's like, oh, I do this. And I never once questioned that he was a diversity hire, right? Glasses, the Patagonia sweater. I was like, okay, of course he's great at his job. He works at a tech company, right? Somebody sees me, and I will oftentimes be introduced to people, and like, I'm smart off top. Like, you could have a conversation with me in the gym, and you can tell, oh, that dude is smart, right? And I will still find myself saying, well, I went to graduate school at Emory University, the Goizueta School of Business, top 10 business school in the country, blah, 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 right? Because there's this look alike, how are you a senior vice president? We're senior vice president of what? Black stuff, right? You know what I mean? I'm talking about my experience as a Black executive in the world, and that's kind of, it's different.
So I think we cancel the diversity hire.
Yeah, we gotta cancel it. We gotta.
What is that in language?
This one, Carissa, this is in a similar vein. So I wanted to give this one to you. But so again, I love the language shift from goals, not quotas. I think that was really important. I know we talked about it on our prep call, and that was a moment for me of like learning that I was like, oh my gosh, I have such a different view on this now. But I do think that there's a follow-up sentiment or a concern when that happens, right? And I think you touched on it a little bit, Drew. And I'll use an example of this as well, but where does that delegitimize a person, right? So the diversity hire, to your point. And so I think we've kind of covered this, but this is an example that I think all of us are familiar with. But when President Biden said, I'm going to select a VP who is a woman of color, people were like, yay. And then there were some people who were like, great, well, now she's here because she's a woman of color, not because she's actually qualified. So I think that that's the follow-up question or concern that I know I've heard a lot of and been a part of conversations with setting goals. So I just wanted more thoughts from you on that as well.
I think, again, it's that assumption that the norm, the standard, the best is cis, hetero, white, male, right? And I think that's the underpinning kind of part about this, right? When we're asking that question, it's like, because that's what we're assuming. And this is whether it's conscious or unconscious at this point, I mean, it's probably conscious at this point to me, as a bias, right? That we're saying that this person here is the standard of excellence, but not this Black woman over here. And I think that is why is that the assumption, right? And it's not to discredit that is a feeling that's real. We've heard this. And I think it's a culture shift, right? Like anything of challenging what I don't know that we necessarily believe to be true, but is something that is maybe more dominant narrative. And so redefining what excellent is, redefining what qualified means, redefining what professional means, right? I mean, we don't have to wear suits anymore to organizations. I just wanted to wear some pretty pants and some shiny shoes because I don't get to dress up anymore. I wear sweatpants all the time, But when we're starting, you're starting to see organizations also redefine exactly what the best, the top, should mean and what that looks like. But we have to, I think, get used to it as a a society, as a culture, right? And that includes Black women saying, "I am the best," right? That includes the allies room saying, yeah, of course she is, and not questioning it. You know, that is the norm we need to get to. And again, if we don't acknowledge something, we can't fix it, right? We don't fix what we don't see. We don't fix what we believe, what we don't challenge, right? So that is the thing. Imagine and say, like, the standard of excellence here for that role is you, right?
But I to double click on that, I think when we talk about what does extra effort look like, extra effort means that the hiring manager puts all of that, any questions anybody has, to bed as soon as they introduce that new hire. That means that's what extra effort looks like. That means that I'm going to tell you all the reasons why this person got this job, so that if there's any question in your mind why they got this job, then that question is on you, not on her, not on the organization, not on the recruiter who did the yeoman work to go out and find this incredible talent, right? And so that's not just about allyship, because allyship kind of feels like I'm doing you a favor, like that's about setting people up for success. That's about being an adult in the room and saying, this person got hired because they did all of these amazing things at this other organization, and we want a little bit of that over here too, right? And I, as the person who was one of the final decision makers, I'm invested in their success, and my expectation is that all of you will be invested in her success as well, right? And so that she may be standing there, Black woman, but you see leader who has the confidence of another proven leader in the organization. That's different.
I want to follow up because we've touched on allyship and advocacy, and I want to make that distinction. I want to also acknowledge, too, that we've got some belonging groups that Alicia and them have put together, and they're incredible. We've got 6 and probably more to come. But then most of us also identify with at least once or many of those. What about some of the communities and team members who don't identify with them but still have a desire and a passion to be part of inclusion and belonging and really building that? So what is allyship versus advocacy, and like examples of both, essentially? And Chris, I'll start with you.
You know, one of the things I want to make a point about with allyship is that it's not something we can self-identify, right? I am an ally to this particular identity, right? I just want to note that, right? It's something you earn. It's a privilege. And the way I define allyship is when I see someone going out of their way, doing something that is hard, that is uncomfortable, that is challenging, disrupting their ease, their day, right? To stand up for me, to mention my name for a promotion, for a project, for an opportunity when I'm not in the room, right? And I think that's the big thing when the self-identifying of allyship is like, that's not real to me, right? I can point to folks and say, thank you. You can be an advocate, right? But I can point to much fewer folks that I say, you are an ally to my community. You've been an ally to me, and thank you. Something as simple like I did this morning is checking in, like I said, with your Asian friends, Asian colleagues. That took 2 seconds to maybe text somebody and say, how are you doing? Saw this world, national news of a tragedy, And it's the other thing with allyship is it's not in one time alone and I'm a good person and I'm the ally, the Asian community right now. It doesn't stop with the one time, right? It's the consistency. I'm an executive coach, right? And I had a client, kind of the cishet 40-year-old white male that we talk about. And one of the things he said to me at one of our sessions, I'm sure he didn't fully intend it, but he admitted, I can walk away, right? I don't walk around like you, Carissa, on the streets and get yelled racial slurs at you, when I'm just heading to a dinner in Brooklyn, right? Minding my business, having laugh with friends, right? Through the pandemic, I'm a pretty outgoing person. And through the pandemic, I have a sense of fear now, just sometimes walking particularly in spaces where I don't see faces that look like mine or people of color in general, right? And it's not something that I can walk away and I can't just automatically change my eye shape or my skin tone, right? But what this client of mine said to me was really, I think it kind of passed over him too until I brought it up. I'm like, that is a privilege, you know, to be able to walk around without that fear of someone just yelling at you. I was physically attacked in one case, so physically it's coming for you, right? And then to be kind of a different person or fearful even as a leader, even as someone who is on a stage and can speak up and speak loudly, that's a fear, and that just acknowledging that privilege, right? And then the next step is, what are you going to do with that privilege? And I know we're using the example of white men, but I'll say allyship isn't just white men to people of color, right? It's also me being an ally to you, right? That might not be a thing, right? There is anti-Blackness in the Asian community for sure. Let's name that. And interrogating that and looking at that, right? So I come back to it just to say, like, you cannot say that you are an ally of any given community. If someone pulls you aside and says, hey, like, you are my ally to me, right? And thank you. And doing the difficult thing, acknowledging the privilege you have, standing up consistently, showing up in places where, you know, on your Saturday morning or whatever, that you don't need to be, right? But you choose to, because you want to do more. You want to listen. You want to be in community with and learn and do, and actually be and earn that title of ally.
Allyship is about action. Advocacy is about action, right? Like, when I was at my former company, I had like a little ally badge for like the women at work. And then I had an ally poster with had a rainbow sticker on it or whatever. And I was like, I'm such an ally. And I was like, if people can come to my office and say anything to me, I'm such an ally. And I was like, if people have something that happens, I'm a soft place to land. But people were landing all over the place at work, and I hadn't done anything, like no action whatsoever, but have on the badge and have my door open. That's not really allyship, right? Like, that's just like, that's a good coworker. Allyship is something totally different. That means that if I'm advocating, that means I'm learning about other cultures. I'm learning about other people's lived experience, particularly their lived experience at work. Maybe I read an article. Maybe I'm having a conversation. I'm not necessarily asking a person of color or a person from the queer community or a woman to educate me on their spare time, right? Like, I'm actually going out and trying to figure some of these things out for myself. That action part of it. It's also self-awareness. It's doing a serious, like, self-check to say, do I automatically assume Republican is a proxy for racist? Like, that's a question I had to ask myself as a leader, right? Like, and so that's work. That's doing the work. That, or someone just say, dude, I think this is a proxy for that. Do I assume that if a person comes into my office and they are interviewing for a job and they're visibly pregnant, am I going to still give them the same listen that I would for someone who is not? Right? That's a tough question you got to ask yourself, because I know that there's some people in the room who may say, I would absolutely give her the exact same, listen, who in the back of their mind, they were like, okay, let me do the math. Like, when she's going to start, and then she's going to go on mat leave. When's she coming back? I need somebody to do this now, right? So you got to do a self-assessment too. Advocacy and allyship also comes with a modicum of self-awareness. And I didn't become truly self-aware in corporate America until the first time a superstar employee came to my office and said, Drew, I'm having a baby. And I was like, whoa, I have no idea what to say. I have no idea like how I should feel or think about this. I did not know what our maternity leave policy was. I didn't know if we even had one, right? And so I was like, didn't think I was going to that today was the day I was going to be, the person in the room with the power, as opposed to always being the person, the underrepresented group, right? Like, I'm a male in leadership. I am not an underrepresented group in that sense, right? And so I had to like take a look inside. And that's something that we all can do and we all should do, because, you know, that's the beginning of the allyship.
Yeah. So great, because I wanted to talk to you both about, and you kind of touched on it already. You may have some folks in the room who are saying, okay, I got some unconscious that I just found out were conscious biases, you know, in this moment. And like, how do I deal with that? Or I'm on a team with someone, or I've noticed it within the organization. How do I call it out? You know, what does that look like? Am I the one educated? So if you could just speak on that. I know it's a broad question, but give us some thoughts.
I'm going to go off of what you said, Drew, about that self-awareness, right? So one of the first, what I really believed when I was head of DEI at Zappos was that emotional intelligence, EQ, was a foundational skill set that we needed to be able to hear each other. And mind you, this was this was in 2016. So you can imagine the environment that I was in when I was really took the lead on this. And we're like, we're not going to hear anything from each other, right? And we're kind of, before we can even listen to one another, we have to be understanding of what's going on for ourselves. So that self-awareness part is critical. And, you know, I would say that a lot of us aren't as self-aware as we could be, right? And what that looks like, so for example, for an emotional intelligence, that first skill set, again, is learning about yourself. So that's paying attention to how you be able to say how you feel, right? Acknowledging those feelings, acknowledging what's happening in your body. Your body's smarter than, you know, and can process faster than your mind can. And it will tell you when something's up, right? Then you can voice the emotion that's coming out of there, right? A lot of times when folks are getting into this type of work, or even interested, right, not doing this, say, professionally, it's what happened to you. You know, first, even with the idea of allyship, what has happened in your life that has shaped your experiences and the way you look at this world and the way you were looking at this person who is now across the seat from you, across the table from you, and sharing something, potentially a story that is wildly different from your own, or anything that you could even imagine is possible and real, and to acknowledge that is that person's reality, right? But sometimes we can't even we can't have the dialogue because it's so uncomfortable. We don't even know what's going on for ourselves, right? And so again, how can we be good listeners? How can we be good allies to folks when we are not even sure what we're even doing here and what we believe in, what our values are, what we care about, you know, what has happened to us? And that's maybe the first thing I'll say is like, an action is investigating that, asking yourself, what happened to me, right? Why do I hold these values and beliefs about anything, really? It doesn't have to be racialized or about a DEI topic, but that'll give you some foundation to be able to also understand empathy, right? Be able to, again, listen and then believe what is coming across to you from the other side. So I highly advise picking up a book or watching a course or something in EQ beyond what you can learn as a skill set for your interactions with each other as colleagues, right, and friends. I found even more of the benefit of this outside of the workplace, right, and how I talk to my partner, how I talk to my parents and such, right, and just even how I move through the world, so much more calm. I think my big kind of go-to, you know, when I'm in conflict is fight, and had to learn how to manage those strong emotions, right? And doing some of that work. So I highly advise that EQ is it's foundational to this work. I do not know that we're going to be able to be and sit in discomfort and have a challenging potential dialogue, not be defensive about everything, if we're not understanding and feeling into and starting with those foundations of emotional intelligence and self-awareness.
Yeah, I would only say if you feel like you're in a situation where somebody says something that's really uncomfortable to you, I would say take a beat. You're at work. Take a beat. You're at work. Take another beat, right? And then gather how you want to think about it. You're not required to act or say something on the spot. Like, oftentimes you need after you take that beat, then have a conversation with somebody pretty quickly afterwards, if that's right. I actually have my own sort of personal board of directors that I run things by all the time. Many of them who are in my group chat, like I would say, hey, they gave me all of the interns from Howard. Is that because I'm Black? Right? You know, and my group chat is like, absolutely, of course it is, right? And I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. Right? But if somebody says something, you know, wildly out of the pocket to me, then I think that that's one of those things where, you know, most of us, if you have a great relationship with your manager, maybe have that conversation with your manager, like, hey, this happened to me. I'd love to get your POV on it. Like, I want to make sure that that I have the right reaction for our culture, but I also would like some guidance on it so that you understand how I felt in this moment, and so that this problem isn't just my problem by myself, right? Because a lot of times you need a beat, and you need some guidance and some POV. And I think that comes from a couple places. And it also takes you off the island by yourself.
Well, we're going to bring it home because I think you both shared some amazing things and great tidbits and advice and insight. But if we can summarize to close us out for each of you, as we can continue on this forever journey without a destination, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave with us here today?
Go first.
Sure. I will say that micro actions, little small actions can lead to big change. I didn't start off as a DEI consultant or even a DEI professional. I was in operations. I was an analyst for years, and I got pissed off, frankly, is what happened. I did all the things I was supposed to do, right? I climbed that ladder. I was a good employee. And then I get there and I'm like, what? Hey, I'm by myself. I'm the youngest. I'm the Asian, right? I'm the woman in the room, right? I'm newest to the company and a progressive one at that. And I'm like, where is everyone? And what starts off, as a small feeling, and is that the EQ, right? The EQ training I had didn't tell me how to be better at DEI necessarily. It told me why this mattered to me, why I'm going to sit on a stage and have an uncomfortable conversation with hundreds of people, because it's as uncomfortable that may be for me, right? It's a mission, and it starts off small, having conversations with one person about what happened in my life, right? Why I feel this way, that I feel anything that can expand to 2 people, 20 people, 200 people, 2,000 people in an all hands, a LinkedIn influencer at this point, right? And so that it starts small, and everyone has a responsibility. And I think this year, more than anything, like more than the last few years, there's a lot of listening and learning. I think there was especially a racial awakening, I think, for the U.S. And I hope this doesn't go away, that the conversations, the terms that you might have heard today, I talked about white supremacy culture, right? Google that. When you talk, we're experiencing that on a day-to-day basis. Things like privilege or senses of urgency, perfectionism. Google that term if you don't know what I'm talking about. And it doesn't mean the KKK, right? And taking an action as small as it could be, but not just listening and reading some books and reading some articles and self-proclaiming you're an ally, right? That's that next uncomfortable step. And I'll tell you, maybe the first part is starting with that EQ, because learning how to even sit there and embrace those emotions, feel them, because we don't do that as a society. We don't do that. That's not what a leader does. A leader does not cry on a stage or ever, right? False. We know that. But are we exercising that? Are we practicing that? Do we actually believe it? And maybe that last thing I'll say is believe it is possible, right? One of my favorite authors, Adrienne Maree Brown, activist, right, talks about radical imagination. You imagined a company, you imagined Calendly, right? So that this thing happened, this was created. Didn't exist. We were putzing around trying to have one-on-one conversations and try to organize ourselves, and it was a disaster. I'm an entrepreneur. This is life-changing, this tool that you've created here, right? One step, one little thing, as wild and radical as it may seem like a small movement now, but you don't know what's going to happen, how that's going to snowball into this bigger movement. And all of us have to be brave enough to take that step, that one step, and imagine and believe that change is possible.
I'm in with 2 things, right? There are 2 things that I think, if we're talking about that is advice for the end, that is, 1, believe that you can be better. and that inclusion can make you a better organization and a better, more innovative, more profitable organization, right? Like, this isn't about, oh, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. This is about being a better, more efficient, more profitable organization. All of the data says that more diverse and inclusive organizations are more efficient and they are more profitable. So think about it from that standpoint. Don't be afraid to be better. The second part of it is, I would say, is that make it personal. If you really want this to work, your leadership team has to make it personal. Why do I care about inclusion? Why do I care about diversity? You got to have your own story in your head, because there are going to be hard moments that you're going to have to say, no, why are we doing this again? And for that, for the teams and for the leaders, they have to say, oh, I'm doing this because I believe this. I'm doing this because I've seen this at work. I've seen this happen, right? And for individuals, I think where you start to grow is when it becomes personal for you as well. And so knowing from the top down that, one, we believe in this, we are not afraid to be better. We're already pretty damn good. I mean, we just looked at the numbers. So let's also think, this is one more thing that we can add some operational rigor to make us better. And then personally, here's why I actually care beyond just the money at the end of the day, or the profitability or the efficiency at the end of the day. Here's why I personally care. I would love for our entire company to be able to say that we are doing well and doing good at the same time, right? It's got to be personal, and you got to believe in the fact that it will make you better, or else just don't do it.
Hey, man. Well, can we give it up for our guests, y'all? Yeah. And give it up for yourselves, too. Thank you for engaging in this conversation. That is the end of Candid Combos, and we'll take that last part. Team Calendly, I just want to challenge all of us to make it personal so that we can be better. All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.